The pregnancy test hit the kitchen counter like a loaded gun. "Nick, honey, we need to talk." Sienna's voice carried that sing-song quality she used when she wanted something expensive. Her manicured fingers drummed against the granite countertop we couldn't afford, the sound echoing through our McMansion like a warning bell. I looked up from my laptop where I'd been reviewing invoices for Hammond Hardware, the small business I'd built from nothing after leaving my IT consulting job. Numbers don't lie, unlike wives apparently. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent the last 5 years helping customers fix broken things while my marriage crumbled around me. "What's up?" I asked, though her theatrical positioning next to the positive pregnancy test made the conversation's direction painfully obvious. Sienna's smile could have powered our overpriced suburb for a week. "We're having a baby!" The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I stared at the little plastic stick with its damning pink lines, my mind performing calculations that had nothing to do with due dates. When was the last time we'd been intimate? March? February? It was now late September, and the math didn't add up any better than our credit card statements. "That's wonderful," I managed, forcing my face into what I hoped resembled joy rather than the cold fury building in my chest. "How far along?" "About 6 weeks." She practically bounced on her designer heels. "I know we've been having some rough patches, but this changes everything, doesn't it?" Rough patches. That's what she called the slow collapse of our 8-year marriage. The late nights at her marketing firm. The mysterious phone calls she took in the bathroom. The way she flinched when I touched her, like I carried some contagious disease called reality. "It changes everything," I agreed. And for once, I wasn't lying. That night, after Sienna fell asleep clutching pregnancy magazines she'd somehow already acquired, I sat in my basement workshop surrounded by the tools that had become my closest companions. Screwdrivers, hammers, saws, honest instruments that did exactly what they promised, unlike the woman sleeping upstairs. My phone buzzed. A text from Eddie Kowalski, my oldest friend, and the only mechanic in town who'd work on my ancient pickup truck. "Drinks tomorrow? Sarah's driving me nuts about the wedding planning." I typed back, "Rain check, family stuff." Family stuff. The phrase tasted bitter. What we had upstairs wasn't family, it was performance art, and I'd been playing the fool for far too long. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and started making lists. Not grocery lists or honey-do items, but something far more important. Timeline, evidence, resources. If Sienna wanted to play games, she'd picked the wrong opponent. I might not have her MBA or her 6-figure salary, but I had something she lacked: patience, and a complete willingness to burn everything down to find the truth. The basement workshop had been my sanctuary for years, the one place in our house where Sienna never ventured. Too dirty, she claimed. Too masculine. Perfect for what I had in mind. I opened my laptop and began researching private investigators, then stopped. Why pay someone else when I had the skills myself? 15 years in IT consulting had taught me things about digital forensics that most people never considered. Phone records, credit card statements, GPS tracking, all perfectly legal when you're investigating your own wife's activities. The next morning, Sienna floated around the kitchen like she was auditioning for a breakfast cereal commercial. She'd already scheduled a doctor's appointment, called her mother, and started browsing baby name websites. The performance was flawless, except for one detail. She kept checking her phone with the desperate frequency of someone expecting important news. "I should probably cut back on work stress," she mused, sipping herbal tea instead of her usual coffee. "You know how demanding clients can be." I knew exactly how demanding her clients were, particularly the one whose contact information was listed under personal trainer in her phone. Caleb Bishop ran an upscale fitness studio downtown and had the kind of artificially enhanced physique that attracted bored suburban wives like moths to a flame. "That's probably smart," I said, buttering my toast with mechanical precision. Health comes first. She beamed at me like I'd just solved world hunger. I'm so glad you understand. I was worried you might be upset about the timing. Upset? That was like calling a hurricane a light breeze. But I wasn't upset, I was focused. There's a difference between emotional reaction and strategic planning, and I'd moved firmly into the latter category. After Sienna left for work in her BMW, another purchase we'd discussed but never agreed on, I made my first move. Our home computer system was networked through a router I'd installed myself, which meant I had administrative access to everything. Phone backups, email synchronization, browsing history. It was all there, waiting for someone with the right skills to connect the dots. What I found in the next 3 hours would have destroyed a weaker man. Text messages that made my skin crawl, photos that violated every boundary of our marriage, financial records showing payments to hotels I'd never seen. But instead of breaking down, I felt something cold and calculating settle into my chest like ice forming on a winter lake. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Sienna wasn't just having an affair, she was planning her exit strategy. The pregnancy was her insurance policy, a way to guarantee alimony and child support while she transitioned to her new life with Caleb. Except, there was one problem with her plan. The baby wasn't mine, and I could prove it. Medical records are surprisingly easy to access when you have someone's passwords and social security number. Sienna's gynecologist appointments showed a pattern that lined up perfectly with her hotel visits and mysterious late nights. The conception date she'd given me was off by nearly a month. A month when I'd been in Chicago helping my sister Jennifer move after her divorce. I sat back in my desk chair, staring at the evidence spread across multiple browser windows. Most men would have confronted their wives immediately, demanded explanations, maybe thrown some dishes. But I'd learned something valuable during my years fixing other people's problems. The best solutions require careful planning and perfect timing. My phone rang. Sienna's ringtone, "Here Comes the Sun" by the Beatles, which now seemed like cosmic mockery. "Hi, honey," she chirped. "I'm having lunch with Lila today. Girl, talk about the baby. Don't wait up if I'm late. You know how we get when we start talking." Lila Martinez was Sienna's best friend and co-conspirator, a fellow marketing executive with the moral flexibility of a yoga instructor. If Sienna was planning something, Lila would know about it. "Have fun," I said. "I'll probably be working in the shop anyway." "You spend too much time down there," she said with fake concern. "It's not healthy to isolate yourself." Isolate myself. The woman who'd been living a double life for months was lecturing me about isolation. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with my circular saw. After hanging up, I made my second move. If Sienna wanted to play the pregnancy card, I'd need medical documentation that couldn't be disputed. I called Dr. Patricia Hoffman, our family physician, and scheduled an appointment for couples counseling regarding family planning concerns. "Of course, Mr. Hammond," the receptionist said. "Dr. Hoffman always recommends genetic counseling for couples over 35. Very responsible of you both." Responsible. That was me. Responsible Nick Hammond, small business owner and devoted husband, just trying to do right by his growing family. The perfect cover for what I was really planning. That evening, Sienna returned home glowing with excitement and expensive wine on her breath. She'd bought prenatal vitamins, pregnancy books, and a onesie that read, "Made with Love." The irony of that last purchase wasn't lost on me. "Lila is so excited to be an aunt," she gushed, modeling the tiny garment against her still flat stomach. "She's already planning the baby shower." I watched her performance with the detached interest of a scientist observing lab rats. Every gesture, every word, every calculated smile was data to be analyzed and filed away for future use. "That's great," I said. "I scheduled us an appointment with Dr. Hoffman, to make sure everything's progressing normally." For just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw something flicker across her face. Fear, maybe, or calculation. Then the smile snapped back into place like a rubber band. Of course. When? Next Friday afternoon. I figured we could make a day of it. Maybe lunch afterward, celebrate properly. She nodded enthusiastically, but I caught her glancing at her phone again, no doubt already composing messages to Caleb about this unexpected development. That night, after she fell asleep, I returned to my workshop and continued planning. Phase 1 was information gathering, completed. Phase 2 would be verification. The doctor's appointment would provide that. Phase 3 would be the most delicate, exposing the truth in a way that maximized damage to her while protecting myself legally. I wasn't interested in violence or anything that would land me in jail. I wanted something far more devastating, complete social and professional destruction, served with surgical precision. My phone buzzed with a text from Eddie. "You've been MIA lately. Everything okay?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Just working through some things. I'll call you soon." Soon, when this was all over and I could explain why I'd disappeared from my normal life. Eddie wouldn't understand the planning phase. He was a direct action kind of guy, the type who'd confront problems head-on with his fists if necessary. But this situation required a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. I opened a new document on my computer and began typing, "Project Timeline. When She Lied About the Baby." The title felt appropriately clinical for what I was planning. By dawn, I had a complete strategy mapped out, including contingencies for every possible reaction from Sienna and her co-conspirators. It was going to be beautiful in its simplicity and devastating in its execution. The best part? She'd never see it coming. Dr. Hoffman's office smelled like antiseptic and broken dreams. I sat in the waiting room next to Sienna, who was practically vibrating with nervous energy while pretending to read a parenting magazine. Her performance was Oscar-worthy, the glowing, expectant mother, slightly anxious but mostly excited about her first pregnancy. "Mr. and Mrs. Hammond?" The nurse's voice cut through my wife's theatrical sighing. "Dr. Hoffman will see you now." Dr. Patricia Hoffman had been our family physician for 6 years, ever since we'd moved to Millbrook Heights, with its perfect lawns and perfectly hidden secrets. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd seen enough medical drama to spot inconsistencies from across the room. "Congratulations," she said, reviewing Sienna's file. "Though I have to say, I'm a bit surprised. Your last appointment was only 2 months ago for your annual physical, and there was no mention of trying to conceive." Sienna's laugh sounded like breaking glass. "It was a surprise for us, too. You know how these things happen." I knew exactly how these things happened, just not with me. "We'd like to make sure everything's developing normally," I said, "given our ages and all." "Of course. When was your last menstrual period, Mrs. Hammond?" The question hung in the air like a sword. I watched Sienna's face carefully, noting the micro-expressions that most people would miss. The slight tightening around her eyes, the way her fingers gripped the examination table. "About 10 weeks ago," she said. "Maybe 11. I wasn't tracking closely." Dr. Hoffman made notes, her pen scratching across the paper with mechanical precision. "And you took the pregnancy test when?" 3 days ago. I'd been feeling nauseous, tired. You know the signs." I did know the signs. I also knew Sienna had been experiencing them for nearly 6 weeks, based on her internet search history and the Dramamine she'd been hiding in her purse. "Let's do an ultrasound," Dr. Hoffman said. "Get a better idea of gestational age and make sure everything looks healthy." The ultrasound room was dimly lit, filled with expensive equipment that would soon reveal truths Sienna wasn't prepared to share. I held her hand as the technician prepared the machine, feeling her pulse racing beneath my fingers. "This might be cold," the technician warned, applying gel to Sienna's exposed abdomen. The monitor flickered to life, showing grainy black and white images that meant nothing to me but everything to the medical professionals in the room. I watched their faces instead of the screen, looking for tells. "Well," Dr. Hoffman said after several minutes of measurements and calculations, "based on fetal development, I'd estimate you're about 12 weeks along, not 8 as your dates would suggest." 12 weeks. I did the math quickly. That put conception in early July, when I'd been in Chicago helping Jennifer navigate her divorce proceedings. I'd been gone for 10 days, staying in a hotel near her apartment, completely unreachable except by phone. Sienna's hand tightened in mine. "That can't be right. I know when my last period was." "Dates can be tricky," Dr. Hoffman said diplomatically. "Early pregnancy symptoms vary, and some women experience implantation bleeding that they mistake for a light period. The ultrasound measurements are quite accurate, though." I squeezed Sienna's hand reassuringly, playing the supportive husband while my mind raced through the implications. 12 weeks meant she'd known about the pregnancy for at least a month, possibly longer. The timing of her revelation, right after I'd started asking questions about our finances, suddenly made perfect sense. "Is everything healthy?" I asked, injecting just the right amount of concern into my voice. "Everything looks normal for 12 weeks gestation," Dr. Hoffman confirmed. "We'll want to schedule regular checkups, discuss prenatal care, maybe genetic counseling given your ages." Genetic counseling. The phrase hit Sienna like a physical blow. I felt her flinch, saw her face go pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Is that necessary?" she asked quickly. "I mean, we're not that old." "It's standard practice for mothers over 32 and fathers over 35, Dr. Hoffman explained. "Just precautionary. We test for genetic compatibility, potential hereditary issues. Very routine." Genetic compatibility. The tests that would prove, beyond any doubt, whether I was the father of the child Sienna was carrying. I watched my wife's reflection in the darkened computer monitor, saw the moment she realized the trap closing around her. "Of course," I said smoothly. "Whatever's best for the baby." We left the doctor's office with a folder full of pamphlets about prenatal care and a follow-up appointment scheduled for the following month. Sienna was unusually quiet during the drive home, staring out the passenger window at the suburban landscape rolling past. 12 weeks, she said finally. "I can't believe I miscounted so badly." "These things happen," I replied, turning into our driveway. "The important thing is that everything looks healthy." That evening, while Sienna took a bath, her new nightly ritual, claiming it helped with pregnancy nausea, I made my next move. I called Jennifer in Chicago. "Nick?" My sister's voice was warm with surprise. "How's married life treating you?" "Interesting question," I said. "Jen, I need you to do me a favor. Remember when I was there helping with your move, early July?" "Of course. You were here for 10 days. Worked your ass off hauling boxes and dealing with my ex-husband's lawyer. Why?" "I need documentation of that. Hotel receipts, airline tickets, anything that proves I was in Chicago from July 2nd through July 12th. There was a pause. Jennifer was a paralegal. She understood the implications of evidence gathering better than most people. "Nick, what's going on?" "Sienna's pregnant." "That's wonderful. Congratulations." "The baby was conceived while I was in Chicago." Another pause, longer this time. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice was cold with fury. "That lying bastard! What do you need?" I loved my sister, direct, practical, and absolutely ruthless when someone threatened her family. "Everything you can find. I'm building a case." "Legal case?" "Life case. I want to destroy her completely, but I need to be smart about it." "I'll overnight everything tomorrow." "Nick, are you okay? I mean, really okay?" I considered the question seriously. Was I okay? My wife was carrying another man's child and planning to pass it off as mine. My marriage was a lie, my future was uncertain, and I was planning a revenge campaign that would probably end several relationships permanently. "I'm better than I've been in years," I said, and realized it was true. After hanging up, I returned to my workshop and continued documenting everything. Phone records showed a pattern of calls and texts between Sienna and Caleb that intensified around the time of conception. Credit card statements revealed charges at restaurants and hotels I'd never visited. Her work calendar, which she'd foolishly synchronized with our shared Google account, showed client meetings that lasted hours and occurred in locations nowhere near her office. But the most damning evidence was her internet search history. Searches for how to fake pregnancy timing and paternity test accuracy and divorce settlement calculator Massachusetts. She'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. My phone buzzed with a text from Eddie. "Seriously, man, you're worrying me. Call me back." I stared at the message, realizing I'd been so focused on my investigation that I'd neglected my friendships. Eddie, Tom Rodriguez from the hardware store, Mike Chen from our poker group. They'd all reached out recently, and I'd brushed them off with vague excuses about being busy. But I couldn't bring them into this. Not yet. They wouldn't understand the careful planning required, the need for absolute secrecy until I was ready to strike. Eddie especially would want to confront Sienna immediately, probably with his fists. Tom would lecture me about forgiveness and working things out. Mike would suggest couples therapy. None of them understood that some betrayals were too fundamental to forgive. Some lies too calculated to excuse. Sienna hadn't made a mistake. She'd orchestrated a campaign of deception that would have destroyed my life if I hadn't discovered it. I texted Eddie back, "All good, just dealing with some family stuff. I'll call soon." Soon. When this was over and I could explain why I'd disappeared into planning mode. When I could show them what their friend's wife had really been doing while they'd been making small talk at barbecues and birthday parties. The next morning, Sienna left for work early, claiming she had an important client presentation. I waited 30 minutes, then followed her. Not closely. I wasn't some amateur stalker, but with the GPS tracking app I'd installed on her phone during one of her lengthy bathroom visits. She didn't go to her office. Instead, she drove to Caleb's fitness studio, parked in the back lot, and disappeared inside for 2 hours. When she emerged, her hair was mussed, and her makeup needed touching up. She spent 10 minutes in her car, presumably making herself presentable, before driving to her actual workplace. I documented everything. Photos of her car at the studio, screenshots of the GPS tracking showing her location, timestamps that proved she'd lied about her morning presentation. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I needed more ammunition, and I needed to be absolutely certain about the timing. Jennifer's evidence packet would arrive tomorrow, providing the final piece of proof I needed to demonstrate that I couldn't be the father of Sienna's child. That evening, Sienna was unusually affectionate, curling up next to me on the couch while we watched television. She'd changed into yoga pants and one of my old college t-shirts, playing the part of the comfortable pregnant wife. "I've been thinking about names," she said, running her hand over her still flat stomach. "What do you think about Michael for a boy, after your father?" The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. My father had died 3 years ago, and using his name for another man's child was a violation so profound I had to grip the couch cushions to keep from reacting visibly. "That's a nice thought," I managed. "We have plenty of time to decide." She smiled and snuggled closer. "I love you, Nick. I know things have been difficult between us, but this baby is going to change everything." She was right about that, just not in the way she imagined. This baby was going to change everything. It was going to expose her lies, destroy her reputation, and free me from a marriage that had become a prison. "I love you too," I lied, kissing the top of her head while calculating how many more days I'd have to maintain this charade. Not many. Jennifer's evidence would arrive tomorrow, the genetic counseling appointment was scheduled for next week, and I'd already begun reaching out to divorce attorneys. The endgame was approaching, and Sienna had no idea what was coming. That night, after she fell asleep, I returned to my workshop and made final preparations. Bank account transfers to protect my business assets, copies of all documentation stored in multiple secure locations, a detailed timeline of events that would be impossible for her to dispute. Most importantly, I began crafting my revelation strategy. This wasn't just about divorce. It was about complete social destruction. Sienna's career depended on her image as a trustworthy marketing executive. Her social standing in our community relied on her reputation as a devoted wife. Her relationship with her family was built on the foundation of her being the successful daughter who'd married well. I was going to destroy all of it, systematically and thoroughly, with nothing but the truth. The best part? She was going to help me do it. Jennifer's overnight package arrived at my hardware store the next morning, thick with documentation that would serve as the foundation for everything that followed. Hotel receipts, airline tickets, car rental agreements, even photos from her divorce proceedings that showed me clearly present in Chicago during the critical conception window. I spread the evidence across my office desk like a general planning a military campaign. Every piece of paper was a weapon, every timestamp a bullet in the gun I was loading for Sienna. My phone rang. Tom Rodriguez, my assistant manager, calling from the front of the store. "Nick, your wife's here. Says she wants to surprise you with lunch." I glanced at the clock. 11:30 a.m. Sienna never visited the store, claiming it was too dusty and masculine for her tastes. Her sudden appearance felt like reconnaissance, an attempt to gauge my mood and behavior. "Send her back," I said, quickly gathering the evidence into a manila folder and locking it in my desk drawer. Sienna appeared in my doorway moments later, carrying takeout bags from an expensive downtown restaurant and wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She looked radiant, glowing with the kind of happiness that comes from believing you've successfully deceived someone. "Surprise," she said, setting the bags on my desk. "I thought we could have a proper celebration lunch. For the baby." I forced a smile and cleared space on my desk, moving aside invoices and supplier catalogs to make room for her performance. "This is thoughtful. What's the occasion? Do I need an occasion to have lunch with my husband?" She unpacked containers of gourmet salads and sandwiches, the kind of overpriced food that made her feel sophisticated. "I've been thinking about what Dr. Hoffman said yesterday, about the timing being off. I wanted to make sure you weren't worried." Worried, that was one way to put it. Should I be worried? She reached across the desk and took my hand, her engagement ring, a 2-carat diamond I'd gone into debt to buy, catching the fluorescent light. "Of course not. You know how these medical things can be imprecise. The important thing is that we're having a baby together." Together. The word tasted like poison in the air between us. I squeezed her hand gently, playing the reassured husband while my mind catalogued every micro-expression crossing her face. "You're right," I said. "I'm probably overthinking things. It's just such big news, Life-changing." "The best kind of life-changing," she agreed, then launched into a monologue about cribs and nursery colors and baby shower planning that felt like listening to someone plan their own funeral. I let her talk while I ate the expensive sandwich she'd brought, nodding at appropriate intervals and making supportive noises. But I was really studying her, memorizing the way she looked when she was lying, cataloging the tells I'd somehow missed during 8 years of marriage, the way her left eye twitched when she mentioned timing, how her voice pitched slightly higher when she talked about our baby, the nervous energy that made her fidget with her jewelry whenever she had to maintain eye contact for more than a few seconds. "I should get back to work," she said finally, checking her phone with the compulsive frequency that had become her signature move. "Client calls this afternoon." Client calls. I wondered if Caleb Bishop counted as a client and what services he was paying for. After she left, I called the genetic counseling office and moved our appointment up by 3 days, claiming work schedule conflicts. The receptionist was accommodating, noting that Dr. Hoffman had marked our case as priority due to some unspecified concerns in my wife's medical history. Concerns. That was an interesting word choice. I made a mental note to ask Dr. Hoffman about that during our next appointment. The rest of the week passed in a blur of careful observation and evidence gathering. Sienna's behavior became increasingly erratic as our genetic counseling appointment approached. She suggested postponing it twice, claiming work conflicts, then morning sickness, then a sudden concern about the safety of genetic testing during pregnancy. "I've been reading online," she said over dinner Thursday night, pushing her food around her plate without eating. "Some women say the tests can be risky. Maybe we should wait until after the baby's born." I looked up from my own meal, feigning concern. "What kind of risks?" "Oh, false positives, unnecessary stress. The internet's full of horror stories about couples who got bad information and made terrible decisions." Bad information. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with my steak knife. "I thought you said Dr. Hoffman recommended it." "She did, but doctors don't always know best. Sometimes a mother's instincts are more important than medical advice." Mother's instincts. I wondered what her instincts were telling her about the trap that was closing around her with mathematical precision. "If you're really worried, we can discuss it with the counselor," I said reasonably. "Get professional advice about the risks versus benefits." She nodded reluctantly, but I could see the panic building behind her eyes. The appointment was tomorrow afternoon, and she was running out of excuses to avoid it. That night, she took another long bath, while I made final preparations in my workshop. I'd arranged for Jennifer to be available by phone during the appointment, ready to verify the Chicago timeline if necessary. I'd also prepared copies of all my evidence, organized chronologically and cross-referenced with medical documentation. Most importantly, I'd scheduled a meeting with David Walsh, the best divorce attorney in the county, for Monday morning. Walsh had a reputation for being ruthless but ethical, the kind of lawyer who could navigate complex financial situations without crossing legal lines. Friday afternoon arrived with unseasonable heat that made the genetic counseling office feel like a greenhouse. Sienna sat beside me in the waiting room, her leg bouncing with nervous energy while she pretended to read a magazine about pregnancy nutrition. "Mr. and Mrs. Hammond?" The genetic counselor was a soft-spoken woman in her 40s who radiated the kind of calm competence that made people trust her with their deepest secrets. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. Please come in." Dr. Chen's office was decorated with family photos and children's artwork, the kind of space designed to put anxious couples at ease. She gestured for us to sit in comfortable chairs arranged around a small table covered with informational brochures. "Dr. Hoffman sent over your files," she began, opening a thick folder. "Congratulations on your pregnancy. I understand this is your first child together?" "Yes," Sienna said quickly. "We've been trying for a while." Trying. Another lie to add to the growing collection. We hadn't been trying for anything except to avoid each other for the better part of 2 years. Wonderful. Now, genetic counseling serves several purposes. We discuss family medical histories, potential hereditary risks, and yes, we can perform paternity testing if there are any questions about timing or conception. The word paternity hit the room like a thunderclap. I felt Sienna stiffen beside me, saw her hands clench in her lap. "Is that necessary?" she asked. "I mean, there's no question about paternity." Dr. Chen consulted her notes. "Dr. Hoffman mentioned some concerns about conception timing based on your ultrasound results. She thought it might be helpful to establish a clear timeline, especially given the discrepancy between your reported dates and fetal development measurements." I reached over and took Sienna's hand, playing the supportive husband while making a final, decisive move. "I think it's a good idea. Just to be absolutely certain about everything, for the baby's sake." Sienna's hand was ice cold in mine, her pulse racing so fast I could feel it through her wrist. "Nick, I don't think it's completely non-invasive." Dr. Chen interrupted gently. A simple lab test using a sample from the mother and a cheek swab from the potential father. Results are 99% accurate and available within a week. A week. 7 days until Sienna's carefully constructed lie collapsed completely. I watched her face, saw the moment she realized there was no escape route, no way to avoid the test without raising suspicions that would destroy her just as thoroughly as the truth. Of course, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Whatever's best for the baby. The actual testing took less than 10 minutes. A small sample taken from Sienna's arm, a cotton swab inside my cheek, both samples labeled and sealed with clinical efficiency. Dr. Chen explained the process, the timeline for results, and the various scenarios we might encounter. Results will be available next Friday, she said, handing us information packets. I'll call with the findings, and we can schedule a follow-up appointment to discuss any implications. Next Friday. 7 days for Sienna to either confess or dig herself deeper into the hole she'd created. I was curious to see which option she'd choose. The drive home was silent, except for the air conditioning and the sound of Sienna's rapid breathing. She stared out the passenger window, lost in calculations that couldn't possibly add up to anything good. "Are you okay?" I asked as we pulled into our driveway. "You seem upset." She turned to look at me, and for a moment I saw something raw and desperate in her eyes. "Nick, what if what?" She shook her head, the moment passing. "Nothing. I'm just tired. Pregnancy hormones, you know." That evening, Sienna disappeared into her home office for hours, claiming she had client work to catch up on. I could hear her on the phone through the closed door, her voice urgent and hushed. Probably calling Caleb, maybe Lila, definitely trying to figure out how to manage the crisis that was about to explode her carefully planned deception. I spent the time in my workshop, making final preparations for the confrontation that was now inevitable. The genetic test results would arrive in 7 days, but I didn't need to wait for scientific confirmation of what I already knew. The evidence was overwhelming, the timeline was clear, and Sienna's behavior had confirmed every suspicion. The only question now was how she'd react when cornered. Would she confess and try to negotiate, double down on her lies and hope for a miracle? Or would she try to flip the script and make me the villain in her story? I was prepared for all 3 scenarios, and several others she probably hadn't considered yet. 8 years of marriage had taught me how Sienna's mind worked, how she approached problems and managed crises. She was smart and manipulative, but she'd never faced an opponent who'd been planning her destruction with surgical precision. My phone buzzed with a text from Eddie. "Poker game tomorrow night. You in?" I stared at the message for a long time. Tomorrow night would be exactly 1 week before the genetic test results arrived. 1 week before my life changed completely and permanently. Maybe it was time to start reconnecting with the friendships I'd neglected during my investigation. I texted back, "I'm in. See you at Mike's." It was time to start rebuilding the life I'd have after Sienna's lies finally destroyed her, and I had a feeling I was going to need all the friends I could get. Mike Chen's basement had been our poker sanctuary for 3 years, a wood-paneled refuge where 5 guys could drink beer, talk trash, and pretend the world above didn't exist. The familiar smell of cigar smoke and old carpet hit me as I descended the stairs, carrying a 12-pack of Sam Adams and the weight of secrets I couldn't yet share. "Look what the cat dragged in," Eddie called out from his usual seat at the round table. "We were starting to think you'd died." "Just busy with work," I said, taking my customary chair between Tom Rodriguez and Dave Sullivan. "You know how it is." But they didn't know how it was, and I couldn't tell them. Not yet. Not until the genetic test results arrived, and I could prove everything I'd discovered about my wife's betrayal. Mike dealt the cards with practiced efficiency, his engineer's precision evident in every movement. How's Sienna? We haven't seen her at any of the neighborhood parties lately. She's pregnant, I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. First trimester, so she's been pretty tired. The congratulations came in a chorus of masculine backslapping and crude jokes about sleepless nights and dirty diapers. Eddie raised his beer in a mock toast, grinning with genuine happiness for what he thought was good news. About time, Hammond. Sarah was starting to think you two were never going to have kids. Sarah Chen, Mike's wife, had been dropping hints about grandchildren and family planning for months. The irony that she'd been right to worry, just not for the reasons she imagined, wasn't lost on me. Yeah, well, these things happen when they happen, I said, picking up my cards and trying to focus on the game instead of the bomb that was going to explode my life in 6 days. But as the evening progressed, I found myself studying my friends with new eyes. These men had been my closest companions for years, my support system through work stress and marriage problems and family crises. They'd been groomsmen at my wedding, drinking buddies during good times, and shoulders to lean on during bad ones. How would they react when they learned the truth? Would they support me through the divorce and its aftermath? Or would they see my calculated revenge planning as evidence that I'd become someone they didn't recognize? Earth to Nick, Tom said, waving a hand in front of my face. You going to bet, or just sit there staring at your cards all night? I looked down at my hand, a pair of jacks, mediocre but playable. Like my marriage, I thought grimly. I'll call. The game continued with its familiar rhythm of banter and bluffing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was saying goodbye to something important. This might be the last poker night where I could pretend to be the man they thought I was. Devoted husband, potential father, stable member of their social circle. So what's the timeline on the baby? Dave asked during a break between hands. Sarah's already planning the shower, you know. Due date's in April, I said, sticking to the story Sienna had constructed. Early April, if the doctor's calculations are right. Eddie laughed. Doctors are never right about due dates. Tommy was 2 weeks late, and Lisa was 3 weeks early. Babies come when they want to come. Babies come when they're conceived, I thought, but didn't say. And this baby was conceived while I was in Chicago, helping Jennifer deal with her divorce proceedings. The conversation drifted to other topics. Work, sports, local politics. But I remained distracted, my mind cycling through the evidence I'd gathered, and the confrontation that was approaching like a slow-motion car crash. Around midnight, as we were settling up and preparing to leave, Eddie pulled me aside. Nick, can I talk to you for a minute? We stepped away from the others, into the corner of Mike's basement near the old pool table that hadn't been used in months. What's going on with you? Eddie asked, his voice serious in a way that reminded me why we'd been friends for 15 years. And don't give me that busy with work bullshit. I've known you too long. I looked at my oldest friend, this man who'd been best man at my wedding and godfather to children I'd never had, and felt the weight of everything I couldn't tell him. Eddie was direct and loyal, and completely incapable of the kind of strategic thinking my situation required. If I told him the truth, he'd want to confront Sienna immediately, probably with his fists. Just dealing with some stuff at home, I said finally. Nothing I can't handle. He studied my face with the intensity of someone who'd known me since college. This is about Sienna, isn't it? The question hung between us like a loaded gun. Eddie had never particularly liked my wife, though he'd been diplomatic about it for the sake of our friendship. He'd made occasional comments over the years about her spending habits, her treatment of service workers, her tendency to dominate conversations at social gatherings. Why would you say that? Because you've been different for months, distant. And now she's pregnant, and instead of being happy, you look like someone died. I wanted to tell him everything. The affair, the lies, the genetic testing that would prove the baby wasn't mine. I wanted to unload the burden of knowledge that had been eating at me for weeks. But I couldn't. Not yet. The timing wasn't right, and Eddie wouldn't understand the need for patience and strategic planning. "I'm fine," I said, just adjusting to the idea of being a father. He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes, but he let it go. "Okay, but if you need anything, you know I'm here, right? We all are." I nodded, feeling like a fraud for accepting support under false pretenses. These men thought they were congratulating a new father and supporting a friend through a major life transition. They had no idea they were actually witnessing the final days of an elaborate deception. The drive home took me through the heart of Millbrook Heights, past the perfectly manicured lawns and expensive cars that represented everything Sienna valued about our life together: status, image, the appearance of success and happiness, all of it built on lies that were about to collapse. I pulled into our driveway and sat in my truck for a moment, looking at the house we'd bought together 8 years ago. It was a beautiful home, colonial style, 4 bedrooms, finished basement, 2-car garage. The American dream made manifest in brick and mortar and a 30-year mortgage. Soon it would be gone, along with everything else Sienna had worked so hard to build. The divorce would force a sale, and the proceeds would be split according to Massachusetts law, but that was the least of what she was going to lose. Inside, the house was dark except for a light in Sienna's home office. I could hear her voice through the door, urgent and hushed, probably talking to Caleb about the genetic testing and its implications. I climbed the stairs quietly and went to bed alone, as I had most nights for the past 2 years. Tomorrow would be Sunday, and Sienna would probably want to go to brunch with Lila and discuss baby plans while I smiled and played the devoted husband. 5 more days until the test results arrived. 5 more days of pretending before I could finally stop lying to everyone, including myself. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment I thought it might be Eddie, checking on me after our conversation. Instead, it was from a number I didn't recognize. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." I stared at the screen, reading the message 3 times before its implications fully registered. Someone knew about my investigation. Someone was threatened enough by what I discovered to send anonymous warnings. The question was, who? Sienna didn't have the technical skills to trace my digital activities, and she was too image-conscious to resort to crude threats. Caleb was a gym rat with more muscles than brains, hardly the type for subtle intimidation. That left Lila, Sienna's best friend and co-conspirator. Lila worked in marketing like Sienna, which meant she understood digital communication and social media manipulation. She was also smart enough to realize that my discovery of the affair would implicate her as an accessory to the deception. I screenshot the message and saved it to my evidence folder. If they wanted to escalate beyond lies and adultery, I was ready for that too. I'd been planning for every contingency, including the possibility that Sienna's allies would try to intimidate me into silence. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I'd spent months building an airtight case, documenting every lie and preparing for every possible reaction. Anonymous threats weren't going to derail me now, not when I was so close to the finish line. I turned off my phone and went to sleep, dreaming of the day when I could finally tell my friends the truth about everything. The day when I could stop pretending to be someone I wasn't and start rebuilding my life on a foundation of honesty instead of lies. 4 more days. Sunday morning brought unseasonable rain and the sound of Sienna vomiting in the master bathroom. I lay in bed listening to her perform morning sickness for my benefit, timing the intervals between retching sounds with the precision of someone who'd been studying her deceptions for months. Real morning sickness was unpredictable, varying in intensity and timing. Sienna's version followed a pattern. Exactly 12 minutes of theatrical suffering, followed by a shower and the application of makeup to create the pale, wan look of a woman struggling with early pregnancy. I waited until I heard the hairdryer before getting up and making coffee. By the time she emerged from the bedroom, I had breakfast ready and was reading the Sunday paper like a devoted husband concerned about his pregnant wife's well-being. How are you feeling? I asked, looking up from the sports section. Better now, she said, accepting the cup of herbal tea I offered. I think the worst is passing. The worst hadn't even started yet, but I kept that observation to myself. Lila called last night, she continued, settling into her chair at our kitchen table. She wants to take me shopping for maternity clothes this afternoon. You know, get ahead of things before I start showing. Maternity clothes, for a pregnancy that would be exposed as a lie in 4 days when the genetic test results arrived. I wondered if she was genuinely delusional or if this was part of some larger strategy I hadn't anticipated. That sounds nice, I said. I'll probably work in the shop, catch up on some projects. She smiled with what looked like relief. You've been spending a lot of time down there lately. I hope the baby won't interfere with your hobbies. Hobbies. She thought my investigation was a hobby, some harmless tinkering with tools and wood projects. If only she knew I'd been building her professional and social coffin with the same methodical precision I brought to furniture making. After she left with Lila, I returned to my workshop and made final preparations. The genetic test results would arrive Friday, but I didn't plan to wait for scientific confirmation of what I already knew. Tomorrow, I had my appointment with David Walsh, the divorce attorney who would help me navigate the legal complexities of dissolving a marriage built on lies. My phone rang. Jennifer, calling from Chicago. How are you holding up? She asked without preamble. 4 more days, I said. Then it's over. Have you thought about what comes after? I mean, beyond the divorce? It was a good question. I'd been so focused on exposing Sienna's lies that I hadn't given much thought to rebuilding my life afterward. The house would be sold, our social circle would probably fracture along loyalty lines, and I'd be starting over at 42. One crisis at a time, I said. First, I need to survive the explosion. You know you can stay with me if you need to. Chicago might be good for you. Fresh start, new city, get away from all the drama. The offer was tempting. Jennifer had rebuilt her life successfully after her own divorce, and Chicago was far enough from Massachusetts to escape the social fallout that was coming. But running away felt like letting Sienna win, like admitting that her lies had the power to drive me from my home. Thanks, but I think I'll stay and fight. This is my town too. After hanging up, I spent the afternoon organizing evidence and preparing for tomorrow's meeting with Walsh. Bank statements, phone records, photographic evidence of Sienna's affair, medical documentation that would prove the timing discrepancies. Everything organized chronologically and cross-referenced for maximum impact. The anonymous threat from last night bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Someone in Sienna's circle was worried enough about my investigation to resort to intimidation, which suggested they understood the scope of what I'd discovered. I decided to force their hand. That evening, when Sienna returned from her shopping trip with bags full of expensive maternity clothes, I was waiting in the living room with a bottle of wine and what I hoped looked like a guilty expression. We need to talk, I said as she set down her purchases. The color drained from her face. About what? I've been doing some thinking about the genetic testing, about the timing issues Dr. Hoffman mentioned. She sat down slowly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Nick, I told you. I know what you told me, but I also know I was in Chicago helping Jennifer during the first week of July. I have hotel receipts, airline tickets, credit card statements. I wasn't here when this baby was conceived. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Sienna's face cycle through emotions, fear, calculation, desperation, and finally something that looked like relief. I was going to tell you, she said quietly. The lie was so audacious I almost laughed. When? After the baby was born? After you'd collected 18 years of child support? It's not like that. Her voice was barely above a whisper. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness when we were having problems. A moment of weakness that lasted 3 months? She looked up sharply. How do you... Know about the affair? The hotel receipts? The text messages? Sienna, I'm not stupid. I've known for weeks. I watched her process this information, saw the moment she realized the scope of my knowledge. Her carefully constructed deception was collapsing, and she was finally understanding that I'd been investigating her with the same thoroughness she'd applied to lying to me. "What do you want?" she asked finally. It was the first honest question she'd asked me in months. "I want you gone, tonight. Pack a bag and leave. Go to Caleb's, go to Lila's, I don't care. But I want you out of my house." "This is my house too." "Not anymore. My lawyer will be in touch tomorrow about the divorce proceedings." She stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger. "You can't just throw me out. I have rights." "You have the right to leave voluntarily, or you have the right to be exposed publicly when the genetic test results arrive Friday. Your choice." The threat hung between us like a blade. Sienna was smart enough to understand the implications. If she left quietly, she might salvage some dignity and avoid complete social destruction. If she forced a public confrontation, I'd make sure everyone in Millbrook Heights knew exactly what kind of person she really was. "I need time to think," she said. "You have until tomorrow morning. After that, I start making phone calls." She gathered her purse and keys, moving with the mechanical precision of someone in shock. At the door, she turned back to look at me. "I never meant for it to happen this way." "Yes, you did," I said quietly. "You planned all of it. The affair, the pregnancy, the lies. The only thing you didn't plan for was getting caught." After she left, I poured myself a real drink and sat in my workshop, surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal. My phone buzzed with text messages. Sienna, probably, or maybe Lila, trying to manage the crisis that was spiraling out of their control. I didn't read them. Tomorrow I'd meet with David Walsh and begin the legal process of untangling my life from Sienna's web of lies. Tomorrow I'd start telling people the truth about what had really been happening in my marriage. But tonight, for the first time in months, I was alone in my house without having to pretend to be someone I wasn't. The relief was overwhelming. 3 more days until the genetic test results arrived, but the real test was already over. Sienna had failed it the moment she decided that lies were easier than truth, that deception was preferable to honesty. Now she'd have to live with the consequences of those choices, just as I'd learned to live with the consequences of trusting someone who'd never deserved it. My phone rang. Eddie's number on the caller ID. "Nick? Sarah just called. She said she saw Sienna leaving your house with suitcases. Everything okay?" I looked around my workshop, at the evidence of months of careful investigation, at the tools I'd used to build a case that would destroy my wife's carefully constructed lies. "Actually, Eddie, everything's perfect. Can you come over? I think it's time I told you what's really been going on." David Walsh's law office occupied the top floor of a glass building downtown, with windows that offered a commanding view of Boston Harbor. The man himself was exactly what I'd expected from his reputation, mid-50s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The kind of lawyer who charged by the minute and earned every penny. "Mr. Hammond," he said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his massive desk. "I understand you're looking at a divorce with some unusual circumstances." That's one way to put it. I opened the briefcase I'd brought and began laying out evidence in neat stacks. My wife is pregnant with another man's child and has been trying to pass it off as mine. Walsh's expression didn't change as he examined the documents I'd prepared. Phone records, hotel receipts, medical documentation, photographs. Everything organized with the precision of a criminal prosecutor building a case. "This is thorough work," he said after several minutes. "Very thorough. You missed your calling as a private investigator." "I had motivation." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "The good news is that adultery is still grounds for divorce in Massachusetts, and fraud regarding paternity is taken very seriously by family courts. The bad news is that proving all of this could get expensive and time-consuming. How expensive? With this much evidence? Not very. Your wife's attorney will probably recommend settlement rather than fight a case they can't win. He paused, studying my face. The question is what you want out of this. Financial settlement? Public vindication? Complete destruction of your wife's reputation? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself for weeks. What did I want? Money seemed inadequate compensation for 8 years of lies. Public vindication felt petty, but complete destruction. I want her to face consequences, I said finally. Real consequences. She planned this deception for months, maybe years. She was going to let me raise another man's child while she collected alimony and child support. That's not just adultery, it's fraud on a massive scale. Walsh nodded approvingly. I can work with that. We'll file for divorce on grounds of adultery and fraud, seek full restitution for financial damages, and make sure all relevant parties are deposed under oath. By the time we're finished, everyone in your social circle will know exactly what happened. How long will it take? 6 months, maybe less if she doesn't contest. But Mr. Hammond, I have to ask, are you prepared for the collateral damage? Divorce cases like this tend to destroy more than just marriages. Friendships, business relationships, social connections, they all become casualties. I thought about Eddie and the other guys from poker night, about Tom Rodriguez at the hardware store, about the neighbors who'd been congratulating me on the pregnancy. Walsh was right. The truth would damage more than just Sienna's reputation. But the alternative was living with lies for the rest of my life, and I'd already done that for too long. I'm prepared, I said. After leaving Walsh's office, I drove to the hardware store and found Tom Rodriguez restocking paint supplies. He looked up as I approached, his expression cautious in a way that suggested news of last night's confrontation had already started spreading. Nick, how are you holding up? Better than expected. Tom, I need to talk to you about something. About Sienna and the baby, and why she moved out last night. He set down the paint cans and gave me his full attention. Tom had been my assistant manager for 3 years, and more than that, he'd become a friend. He deserved to hear the truth directly from me rather than through the gossip network that was probably already spinning wild theories. I told him everything. The affair, the fake pregnancy timeline, the genetic testing that would prove the baby wasn't mine. Tom listened without interruption, his face growing darker with each revelation. Jesus, Nick. I'm sorry. I had no idea. Nobody did. She's very good at lying. What can I do? You need time off for the divorce proceedings? Someone to cover the store? It was exactly the response I'd hoped for. Practical support without judgment or prying questions. I might need some flexibility over the next few months. Court dates, lawyer meetings, that kind of thing. Whatever you need. That evening, I met Eddie at the Split Rail, the neighborhood bar where we'd been drinking together for 5 years. The place was nearly empty on a Monday night, just a few regulars watching baseball on the mounted televisions. Eddie was already halfway through a beer when I arrived. He looked up as I sat down, his expression grim. Sarah heard from Lila that Sienna's staying at her place temporarily, something about needing space to think about the marriage. That's not exactly how it happened. I told Eddie the same story I'd told Tom, watching his face cycle through disbelief, anger, and finally a cold fury that reminded me why we'd been friends for so long. Eddie was loyal to a fault, and betrayal of any kind brought out his protective instincts. That lying bastard, he said when I finished. Nick, I'm sorry. I should have said something years ago when I started noticing things. What kind of things? The way she talked to you at parties, like you were an employee instead of her husband. The expensive clothes and jewelry when you were telling me business was tight. The way she'd check her phone constantly, like she was waiting for messages from someone more important than whoever she was with. I'd noticed all of those things too, but I'd rationalize them as personality quirks rather than warning signs. It was easier to make excuses than to confront uncomfortable truths. "What happens now?" Eddie asked. "Divorce proceedings start this week. Genetic test results come back Friday, which will prove everything I've told you. After that?" I shrugged. "I start over." "You know we've got your back, right? All of us. Mike, Dave, Tom. We're not going anywhere." It was exactly what I'd needed to hear. The prospect of losing my marriage and my home was daunting enough without also losing the friendships that had sustained me through the worst parts of the last few years. My phone buzzed with a text message, Sienna's number. "We need to talk, please." I showed the message to Eddie, who snorted in disgust. "What's left to talk about?" "Damage control, probably. She's finally realizing how much trouble she's in." "You going to meet with her?" I considered it. Part of me was curious to hear what she'd say now that her lies had been exposed. Would she try to justify her actions? Blame me for driving her into Caleb's arms? Claim the affair was a mistake that spiraled out of control? Yeah, I think I will. But not alone, and not somewhere private where she can try to manipulate me. I texted back, "Tomorrow, 7 p.m., the split rail. Bring Caleb if you want. This ends now." Eddie grinned. "You want backup?" "I want witnesses. Can you make sure Mike and Dave are here tomorrow night? And maybe Tom if he can get away from the store?" "Consider it done. But Nick, what are you planning?" I finished my beer and stood up, feeling lighter than I had in months. "I'm planning to tell the truth, all of it, to everyone who'll listen." The next evening, the split rail was more crowded than usual for a Tuesday night. Word had apparently spread through our social circle that something significant was about to happen, and people had shown up to witness it firsthand. Eddie, Mike, Dave, and Tom occupied our usual table near the back. Sarah Chen was there too, along with several other wives from the neighborhood. Even Mrs. Kowalski from down the street had found an excuse to stop by for a drink. Sienna arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, looking perfectly composed in a way that probably required hours of preparation. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a conservative dress that suggested respectability and vulnerability without being overly dramatic. Caleb wasn't with her, which told me she was still trying to maintain some deniability about the affair. She approached our table with the confidence of someone who believed she could still control the narrative. "Nick, thank you for agreeing to meet. I think there's been some misunderstanding about—" "No misunderstanding," I interrupted, loud enough for the entire bar to hear. "Everyone here deserves to know the truth about what's been happening." I stood up, holding the folder of evidence I'd brought. 3 months ago, my wife started having an affair with Caleb Bishop, the personal trainer who runs the fitness studio downtown. 2 weeks ago, she told me she was pregnant and claimed the baby was mine. The bar had gone completely silent. Even the bartender had stopped washing glasses to listen. The problem is, I was in Chicago helping my sister during the week this baby was conceived. I have hotel receipts, airline tickets, and credit card statements that prove I wasn't anywhere near Massachusetts when Sienna got pregnant. I opened the folder and began pulling out documents. I also have phone records showing hundreds of calls and text messages between my wife and her lover, hotel receipts for rooms I never stayed in, photos of them together that were taken by a private investigator. Sienna's composure was finally cracking. "Nick, please, we can work this out privately." "We had 8 years to work things out privately. You chose to lie instead." I turned to address the crowd that had gathered around our table. "The genetic test results come back Friday, but I already know what they'll show. The baby my wife is carrying belongs to Caleb Bishop, not me." The reaction was immediate and devastating. Gasps, whispered conversations, the sound of someone's drink hitting the floor. Sarah Chen looked like she'd been slapped, while Eddie was grinning with savage satisfaction. Sienna tried one last desperate gambit. "You're humiliating me in public because you're angry. This isn't who you really are, Nick. You're right, I said quietly. The real me would have confronted you months ago instead of building a case like a prosecutor. The real me would have thrown you out the first time I found evidence of your affair. But you trained me to be someone else, someone who accepts lies and makes excuses and pretends everything is fine when it's not. I closed the folder and looked directly at her. I'm done being that person. The divorce papers will be served tomorrow morning. My lawyer has copies of everything I've shown you tonight, plus a lot more evidence you don't know about yet. Sienna looked around the room, seeing the faces of people who'd been her friends and neighbors for years. The judgment in their eyes was unmistakable, and she finally understood that there was no coming back from this moment. She turned and walked out of the bar without another word, leaving behind the wreckage of 8 years of marriage and the social standing she'd worked so hard to build. The crowd began to disperse, people returning to their drinks and their conversations with the satisfied air of those who'd witnessed something significant. Eddie clapped me on the shoulder. How do you feel? I considered the question seriously. How did I feel? Relieved, certainly. Vindicated. Free from the weight of secrets I'd been carrying for months, but also empty, in a way I hadn't expected. The marriage was over, the lies were exposed, and justice had been served. Now I had to figure out what came next. Like I can finally start living my life instead of investigating it, I said. Friday morning brought the genetic test results, delivered by certified mail with the clinical efficiency of modern medicine. I didn't need to open the envelope to know what it contained, but I did anyway, reading the scientific confirmation of everything I'd already proven through months of careful investigation. Probability of paternity: 0.00%. The baby Sienna was carrying was not mine, had never been mine, would never be mine. The lie that had started this whole nightmare was officially, scientifically, legally gone. I called David Walsh and gave him the news, though he'd already been expecting it. The divorce proceedings would move forward rapidly now, with Sienna's attorney undoubtedly recommending settlement rather than fighting a case they couldn't possibly win. That afternoon, Tom Rodriguez found me in my office at the hardware store, reviewing inventory reports and trying to focus on the business that would be my foundation for rebuilding. "There's someone here to see you," he said. "Caleb Bishop. He looks pretty upset." I followed Tom to the front of the store, where Caleb was pacing near the paint display like a caged animal. He was exactly what I'd expected: artificially muscled, artificially tanned, wearing workout clothes that probably cost more than my truck payment. "You son of a bastard," he said when he saw me. "You destroyed her." I told the truth. If that destroyed her, she did it to herself. He stepped closer, trying to use his size to intimidate me. It might have worked on his gym clients, but I'd been preparing for this confrontation for weeks. "She's pregnant with my kid because of you. Because you weren't man enough to keep your wife happy." The accusation was so absurd, I almost laughed. "She's pregnant with your kid because you two were having an affair and got careless. Don't try to blame me for your choices. You humiliated her in public. Made her look like a fool. She made herself look like a fool when she tried to pass your baby off as mine. I just provided the evidence." Caleb's hands clenched into fists, and for a moment I thought he might actually try to hit me. But Tom had called the police when Caleb arrived, and the sound of sirens in the distance seemed to penetrate his steroid-addled brain. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is," I replied calmly. "It's completely over. Sienna's your problem now. Good luck with that." He left just as the police cruiser pulled into the parking lot, probably saving us both a lot of paperwork and legal complications. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized with a settlement that gave me the house, most of our assets, and the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served. Sienna had moved to Florida with Caleb, where they were presumably raising the child that had started this whole mess. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd lost her job at the marketing firm after the scandal broke, and that Caleb's fitness studio had closed when several clients canceled their memberships. The social circle that had once revolved around their affair had collapsed under the weight of public exposure and private shame. As for me, I was rebuilding. The hardware store was thriving. My friendships were stronger than ever, and I was dating someone new, a teacher named Rebecca, who valued honesty above all else. On a warm evening in October, exactly 1 year after Sienna had told me about her pregnancy, I sat on my back deck with a beer and reflected on everything that had happened. The investigation, the confrontation, the divorce, the aftermath. I'd started that journey as a man who'd been betrayed and lied to, someone who'd been made a fool of by the person he'd trusted most. I'd ended it as someone who'd taken control of his own life and refused to accept deception as the price of peace. The cost had been high. A marriage, a social circle, the comfortable illusions that had made life easier to navigate. But the alternative would have been living with lies forever, raising another man's child while my wife collected the rewards of her deception. Some prices are worth paying. Some truths are worth telling no matter how much damage they cause. I raised my beer in a toast to the empty evening air. Here's to the truth, I said aloud. However much it hurts. The words echoed across my backyard, over the perfectly manicured lawn that was now mine alone, through the neighborhood where everyone knew exactly what had happened and why. It was the most honest thing I'd said in years,